the legend. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another session of the Growing the Future Mastermind. We are very thrilled to have you here this morning, especially because we're being joined by somebody who's had one of the biggest impacts on prairie agronomy over the last four decades. Is it more than 4 decades? What's the
Five.
math? Five. 50 years, Dr. Ieaun Evans, aka Dr. Copper. If you've read the grain news columns or you've heard the stories, you know that Ieaun's not just a soil scientist, he's a forensic plant pathologist, an innovator, and a fierce advocate for truth in agronomy. And he's also handsome and rich and kind of a star in the rugby world as well. And he's a darn tootin' strong arm wrestler. Last time I tried when we were in person. And so whether he's diagnosing ergot or unlocking cropper deficiencies or making bold predictions about prairie crop health, he's always bringing science and history, a healthy dose of real world wisdom and some humor, some lighthearted humor. Kind of a funny guy. So today he's going to be taking us deep into the foundations, what prairie soils are really made of. He's actually got some show and tell, old school. I didn't know if he's going to pull out the overhead projector here at some point, but he's got some show and tell, and he's going to show us how these soil types drive the fundamentals from yield to fertility. And he wanted to call it, "If you're not in it, you won't win it," which I think is catchy and true. So you got to be in it to win it. So this session's being recorded. The replay will be available to all the mastermind members. Thanks so much for your gracious participation. And if you have any questions about the session on the replay, you can post them inside the school community where there's starting to be a little bit of discussion. Hopefully it gets going over time. It's useful to others when folks ask questions or make comments. And then we'll keep you up to date when the next sessions are and all that good stuff. So without further ado, Ieaun, would you like to take it away? And then, but anybody who wants to ask any kind of question in the chat or the Q&A any time, I'll do my best to get them as soon as possible, because that's really what makes the conversation fruitful is the questions, right? Yann, you love when people are challenging you or asking you questions so you can set them straight, hey?
And I guess I can admit to being wrong.
Come on. That was not on my bingo card that you were going to admit that you were wrong here in 2025, soon to be 26. Is that real?
I did my soil science. I did my soil science at University of Wales, and I majored in chemistry as well. So I had a heavy hitter there. So in other words, when you look at soils, and I just did not get along with soil scientists in Western Canada, with the exceptions of Elston and Doug Penny. We all converted. We got together, but the rest of the prairies used to drive me nuts. They just didn't catch on with. I'm kind of bragging in a way with Alberta. We had
I'm
a pretty good
shocked.
group. We had a
I'm
good mob
shocked,
at
Yann.
one time,
I never, the first
and
time I've heard this.
we had a good lead with Rob Syke.
Hmm.
Anyway, I just want to show, like I'm going to do this. This is a sandy loam, an ideal soil. We'd all love to have sandy loam. And that is, we call that soil, okay? Now, on the other hand, if we get this kind of soil here, now look at this. I mean, look, we're looking at clay. Look at that soil. I mean, it's going to be disheartening, right? Well, that's still soil. And I don't want to call them by 10,000 names, because when I was at University of Wales, we could identify like 200 different kinds of soils. On the prairies, we had liversolic and zizisolic and sisisolic. What do we mean? Basically, on the prairies, we've got 5 kinds of soil. I'll stick with the 5. We've got gray, black, dark brown, and brown. Just look it up. You only got 5 soil types, and you can even reduce it further. You have the southern prairie soils, the central prairie soils around Edmonton, Lacombe, and then you have the soils of the north of wood soils. Don't think of anything else. Don't give them any fancy names. You will run into solzonetic soils that give you some trouble because that's what pans underneath them. We can't do much about that. But that's soil. Now you see, you don't need soil to grow crops. You can grow crops in this stuff. What's this? This is rock wool. See it? You can grow all kinds of crops, tomatoes, peppers in greenhouses. You don't need soil. You need nutrients. Now, when it comes to soil, soil is just a holder of nutrients. When I hear people saying, "Oh, it's ruined soil, it's spoiled soil," come on, guys. Come on, ladies. Look at it this way. If the soil is non-productive, it means it probably doesn't have any nutrients in it. And the thing is about soils, if it's saline, there's not much you can do about it. Sell it, put some grass on it, use it for recreation because you're not going to change it. If it's flooded, drain it. If you can do it, or if you have permission to do it, drain it. Otherwise, all the rest are soils, and they vary from sandy loam to silts. And you have soils like I'll pick one up here now in a minute. You have soils just nothing but a pile of rocks.
What do you got back there? Tickle
Well,
chomp?
I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this. I had one with a pile of rocks in it, but I don't know where I put it.
Oh yeah, you had the pebbles you were showing me earlier.
Pebbles there. You see, and look at this one here. This kind of soil here. You look at it and say, look at it. That's very coarse sand. I mean, I've seen those soils down in southern Alberta. Very coarse. Well, if those things are around longer and beaten up, they end up as they first of all become silt, and then they become clay. As soil gets beaten up, it just becomes clay. Now, I can ask you one simple question then, and some of you know some of the answers. So, just don't stick your nose in
Yeah,
it.
Ieaun has a habit of asking me really tough agronomy questions that I can't answer. So maybe if people know the answers, put it in the chat here, so I don't look foolish.
Well, you see, look at this way. Well, here's the one I said. The very coarse soil.
those are pebbles.
That's very coarse soil. Now, I can ask a simple question then, because I put that fact sheet together. What weighs the most, a cubic foot of clay or a cubic foot of loam, or in other words, a cubic foot of clay or a cubic foot of sand. You take a cubic foot of sand or a cubic foot of loam.
Who wants to take a stab at that in the chat?
I'm to always get it wrong.
Answer.
The sand is heavier because the sand has less airspace than the clay. Believe it or not, the clay has lots of minor airspaces in it. The sand doesn't. Now, the other thing is, and it's in this fact sheet. I'll go with this fact sheet in a minute now and tell you that because naming soils and putting all kinds of fancy names in them doesn't give you a field. But now Elston helped me on this. This is my pride and joy. You've seen this, right? You've downloaded it.
Minerals to plants.
Plants, animals, and man. Now, you don't need to ask anyone. If you get a soil test, you look at the back here of this. The back of this sheet, right? This took me a year to put together because I had to go to other people. I had to go to nutritionists and stuff, not soil scientists, because they kept saying, "Oh, what you need? Oh, maybe 50 pounds of nitrogen." I used to call them Yamahas. N. Well, I wanted people to say, "Look, wheat, a 60 bushel crop of wheat, 2 tons of straw. Now, what are the nutrients you need for a 60 bushel crop of wheat?" We put it together with help from Sol's labs and stuff. It took a while. I didn't get all the data. You notice there's still some blanks in there. Now, you look at a 60 bushel crop of wheat, you need 105 pounds of nitrogen to be available nitrogen, which you count what's in the soil, you count what you add, right? And then you move along and say, you need about 40 pounds, 50 pounds of phosphate. Hey, you need about 100 pounds of potash. Now, most of the potash is back in the straw, right? So remember now, when you sell straw, you sell a lot of nutrients from your land. I have noticed lately where I live now, it used to be every field had bales of straw in them. This year, I only saw one field with baled straw. They
Mm,
realized that the straw chopper is a much better instrument than the straw baler. It's
mm.
cheaper, it's better. And now they've got sandy loam soil here. They're using straw choppers. And by the way, I found out while I go through this why farmers in this area always welcome renting their land to potato growers. Now, remember this, potato growers like light sandy soil. Okay.
Right. Right.
Now, light sandy soil tends to be the kind of soil that's low in micronutrients because they've run out first, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That tends to be the answer. So farmers say, well, after the spuds were grown in my field, or had a real boost in my wheat yield, tremendous, or the canola grew well, but the wheat in particular, or the barley did really well. It stood up and I got, 100 bushels of wheat or 101 bushels of barley in this area. And they go, that was the residue left behind from the potatoes. No, that's not the answer. Because the spud growers are commonsensical. They're horticulturalists. They're not agricultural farmers in a sense. They put in 7 pounds of zinc, 5 pounds of zinc. They put in 3 pounds of copper. They put in molybdenum. They put in manganese. And they put whatever that soil needs to boost it and keep it up high so that you optimize the spud yield. So when you have that field and you follow through with wheat, you put the nutrients in. Now you've got a much higher level of micronutrients and you get your 100 bushels. If you don't grow potatoes there, like I saw fields this year where potatoes had never been grown, they looked like they go 80 or 90 bushels. They lodged. They keeled over. They had ergot. What was the problem? The old same copper deficiency. Could he get that nose through? Fortunately, most of the naysayers have now resigned or retired from the prairies, eh? There are newer people now who look at things, but they still have this fear of micros, zinc, copper, manganese, molybdenum. When I worked in Ontario, I used to be amazed that, honestly, now the soil scientists there, I become kind of blunt with them, or kind of stupid, because they couldn't understand. Ontario has black muck soil, Alberta has black muck soil, Manitoba has black muck soil. So when they grow things in the black muck soil, what do? They put micros on it. They put a hell of a whack of copper on to begin with, all those black muck soils. Well, these guys would deny us. You go to some sandy soil in Ontario, let's say around the southern Ontario where they used to grow tobacco. That was king. Oh, we can only grow rye there. Rye will only grow there. We can't grow wheat or barley. Well, for Christ's sake, Wheaty Tweety and people like that, put some zinc in there, please.
Okay, so you're making the point that relatively speaking, soils are kind of the same how you treat them with nutrients, but you're also saying that a sandy soil wouldn't hold micronutrients like a clay soil. So don't we have to then put different amounts down in anticipation? Clay is going to hold it more,
No,
sand
not
not so
really.
much.
Clay is it's harder to. Clay has got less ability in clay for it to leach out or move out.
Right,
But I'm not quite sure the reasons why, but clay seems to hold it a lot better. In other words, the clays have bigger reserves, perhaps,
right.
eh? I know she was bigger reserves or slower in releasing them. In other words, a nice sandy soil and a nice weather will give you 120 bushels of wheat, whereas a clay soil may only give you 70.
So don't
So,
we need to fertilize more then on the sandier spots if we're
no,
using
you
the same
just need to
targets?
look at the soil test. You need to look at the soil
Okay.
test, even on a clay soil. Although, if you follow this information here and turn that page, use the bloody sheet. Look at it. Turn the page and look at say boron, as I told you, or copper or zinc. It'll tell you what's medium, high, and low. You see, some of these old people say, "Oh, I know the old soil scientists in Alberta." I don't mean the people I know, the older ones. Oh, 0.5 copper is fine. That's high. High for what? That's high for 30 bushels, high for 40 bushels. But when it comes to 80 bushels, it's damned low. It's low. So I mean, you've really got to figure out, what these signposts they put in. That's sort of minimum and maximum. When do they apply for it? Apply to it? Because when I got your potatoes, I worked with potato growers, and as a friend says, if you're not Dutch, you're not much. But I worked with the potato growers, and what we found was that they were happy with 8 and 10 tons an acre. We use tons here, or bush or whatever, 8 and 10 tons an acre. Well, they would not put on potash. It could not try to explain to them. Now, on this sheet here, you say Clive Shopper was the one who pushed and pushed them, because I went down to Moses Lake. They used to grow on Moses Lake on sandy soil there, real sandy soil. It was like playground sand. They could grow 30 bushels of potatoes, 35 sometimes. And the record for that area was about 40 tons. Now, that area also was the one that grew over 200 bushels of wheat. Now, what do? They put the kitchen sink on. Maybe sometimes they overdid it, but when you looked at those soils, those soils with potatoes. I've got potatoes in here, 20 ton of potatoes, right? That was the thing you should aim at, and they were still aiming at 8 and 10 tons. You aim at 20 tons of potatoes. Well, you're going to put more potash or as much. Well, there it is. You could put more potash than nitrogen. 300 pounds of potash, because they grow potatoes on sandy or lighter soils. Those lighter soils have grown spuds. They've drained out the potash. The same thing with alfalfa and what do you call it? Grass growers. When you keep taking crops off, you know, I used to work with John Harapiak, and John was a lone wolf. What's he doing now talking about potash? We got plenty of it. Well, the point is, alfalfa, a 4 ton crop of alfalfa, takes out, maybe it fixes 175 pounds of nitrogen, but it takes out 175 pounds of potash. So, I mean, it starts to drain your soil. Depends what you grow and what you do. So, with this sheet here, look at this, and it'll tell you. And then, if you want to do your calculations, and remember, in Quebec, they found they had ergot in barley badly. That was due to very, very low boron levels. When the boron levels fell below 0.3, what happens is the pollen tubes in the barley failed, and because the pollen tubes failed, the flowers open. And because they opened, they got ergot. So that was done in Quebec, and they made it a first, but really it had been done in Finland previously, right? But now on the back of this thing here as well, on these sheets, if you look at the bottom of it, it tells you, to convert ppm. I hate all the different, everyone tries to bring in his or her own system, but I stay in parts per million. That's the easiest way to explain it. And look, you calculate what soils do, what soils are, and what does 1% organic mean? What does 10% organic mean? In other words, you can do the calculations based on that information at the base of year. You can do all of your calculation. You think, oh, well, I'll have to ask somebody in soils. Well, well, like I say, I'm not just a knock soil scientist, but you can do these yourself. You become really good. And I'm going to think that the effect that I mean, when I think of people like Rob Syke and stuff, a record wheat yield this year, 57 bushels on average, and canola was close to it, I think, at 42. I mean, it looked like a bad year, but it turned out to be a pretty good year in terms of yields. So, I mean, go with that and think of that. Now, the next part I'll deal with, I might refer to some of this again, but what I'd like to refer to now is I'd like to go back to this one here.
I just had a
by
question,
the way,
Ian. If you're working off numbers from soil tests and you're fertilizing for certain targets, is that, and we talk about the numbers, uptake and removal. What do you fertilize for if you're a farmer? Uptake or removal? You know what I mean? You were talking about nutrients in the
no,
straw.
removal. You fertilize for removal. In other words, there's got to be at least that minimum in the soil to get that yield. There's got to be that minimum of nitrogen, phosphate, and potash. If any of them are low, you'll start missing that out. If the potash is low, it's not very common, but if the phosphate is low, you're going to miss out. Instead of getting, like 60 bushels, you get 40. I mean, I saw this at Ellerslie where soil was, you put up the nitrogen, but the phosphate was down, and the crops did not yield. In other words, that was the block there. And the other thing you see as well was that, as Doug pointed this out, was that when you're growing crops and your phosphate is low, there's a delay in maturity, up to 2 weeks sometimes. In other words, the plant is trying hard to get enough phosphate to get the things going, but it's working at it and it's delayed. And the other thing, I keep asking copper. If your copper is low, there's a delay in maturity again. A delay of up to 2 weeks, 10 days, 2 weeks. We've seen these delays. And it used to be with our shorter summers and our longer summers are better, that delay was important. It's less important now than it was, but there's a delay. In other words, if a nutrient is low, the plant is still trying to get enough of it to achieve its objective, eh? And when I talked about the 16% wheat I mentioned to you earlier, a person from southern Saskatchewan called me yesterday on it. There was 16% nitrogen, 16% protein. I talked about it, and they had a good rain early on, but it went dry in July, August. And I said the plant probably you probably put more nitrogen on than the plant could use because it took it up and then it ran out of water. And if it runs out of water, it keeps pulling up the nitrogen. So what happens, and I was explained to by Doug, I think, that when they do an analysis then of the wheat, they analyze the nitrogen in there. So it may be 12%, 13% protein, but it's 3% nitrogen sitting there as well. And the reason I got into that and thinking of it was in North Dakota, there was a big flap up about 20 years ago, no, more like 40 years ago, where to improve the the protein level of the wheat, they used to throw shovelfuls of urea in with the wheat. And the urea would evaporate or in other words, disassociate amongst the wheat and spread. And so instead of getting 12% or 10% protein in the wheat, they got 14 and 15%. And that was a scam, eh? Because they were measuring the nitrogen in the wheat, not the protein actually. So anyway, that's one little thing there. Now I got to show this
little tip there if you're short on protein.
Huh?
That's a little tip there if you're short on protein, throw in some nitrogen.
Look at this one here. I won't mention any names.
Rejuvenation.
Now soil rejuvenation. Now this was sold. I was asked to join this. I could have been maybe a millionaire perhaps, or worth a few hundred thousand.
You're not a millionaire?
But I would have to go live in let's say Victoria or Little Island because this guy sold things and a complete liar, a complete, I talk of foo-foo. There are liars out there. There are honest people out there. There are companies who do an honest job, and there are complete foo-foos out there. I mean, this guy sold soil rejuvenation. They sold 10-liter jugs for $40 each, or $40 or $50 each. Under rules in Canada and the US, I guess, as well, is if you sell something that is a pesticide or classified as a pesticide, you have to put it on the label and they regulate it, right? But if it's not a pesticide or not considered to be a problem, you can sell it for whatever price you want to, and you don't go through that regulation. You can sell it. Now, this soil rejuvenation in the 10-liter jugs, I'll read you the fertility level of those things. There was 10 liters. It says best farm. Oh, wait, I shouldn't say that. It says this. What's it say on the back here? It says custom rates. Spray at the rate of 100 ml per acre. 100 ml per acre with 20 liters of water using 5-gallon nozzles, right? Can I read you the actual content then? I've seen farmers with shedfuls of it. The amount of nitrogen in there was 0.1%. Phosphorus, P2O5 was 0.02%. The phosphorus, the potash was 0.14%. The sulfur was 0.07, and the calcium 0.013. That was tap water from Edmonton. In other words, he was selling tap water at $50. I mean, a company, and yeah, I was selling it right across there. I ran into a farmer in Saskatchewan, and he had $20,000 worth in a shed. His son insisted I come up and talk to his father, and his father brought a jug out, and I said, open it, and he said, smell it. I said, no smell to it. I said, can I get a glass, please? Glass of water. So he ran into the house and got me a glass with water, and I put the water, threw the water away. Then I opened the jug and poured the water into the cup, and I drank. He said, "Don't do that." He says, "That's." I said, "It's tap water." And he looked amazed. And at the same farm, this gentleman also had a giant dead octopus. It was the machine that came from southern Alberta for it was a cost of I don't know, 10 or 15 or $20,000. It was supposed to drive tractor exhaust back into the soil.
Mm-hmm.
When I started it, I went down to look at it, and I found that this individual was selling a lot of good hay, in making a fair living on a couple of sections of land with his hay crop. And he had legumes in the hay and whatever, but when he worked his other crops in there, he built this attachment, and he got federal money to build it. Now, after talking to a few soil scientists from Brandon, I was able to find out that the amount of nitrogen in an acre from the exhaust would have been about 1 to 2 pounds, and it was just a hoax. In other words, in the fuel, or less than that. In other words, it was a complete hoax, and I didn't have the courage really to move it down one time, but I've heard it's making a comeback. It's a complete hoax. It's a complete foo-foo. And yet farmers will go for foo-foos. Like a complete hoax. Come on. What is blowing exhaust into the ground going to do? Nothing. Except cost you like $15,000 or $20,000 and make a fool of yourself. And then when you buy things, for God's sake, read the label. The label on this tells you what it is, because they have to put down what's in there. And when I see glossy labels, floating around, I begin to think, well, like what the heck's happening? So anyway, I have to go on to the second part now. Look at the time there, because it's there was nutrients which deal with the soil there.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to say one thing. I'm not anti-pesticide, anti-anything, really. I'm a big user of pesticides. And I have to say that, glyphosate is under attack again now. There's a bunch of lawyers after it again, because it's like a whale in the ocean, and they want to take chunks out of it. Glyphosate has done a fantastic job for us, which you've got to think on this. When I came here, snow mold was a problem on winter wheat. We don't see snow mold anymore. Take-all was a problem on wheat, period, on spring wheat.
What is that? Sorry?
Take-all. The stems were black. It was called black root rot. I saw fields in central Alberta with 70-80% take-all, especially after breaking up pastures, So a really bad disease. And I saw take-all up in the Westlock area, 50% in a field, right? Well, our friend glyphosate got rid of it, because how did snow mold persist in the field, and how did take-all persist in the field? It had to have living plants, quackgrass, or farmer's quack, brome grasses. If these were growing in the field and there was weeds, they kept the disease on them. Now, if Roundup took them out, glyphosate took them out, right? There was no bridge there. We cut the bridge. The use of glyphosate cut the bridge and got rid of 2 significant diseases for prairie farmers. Now you can plant winter wheat. You worry about winter hardiness now. You don't just hear anyone talking about snow mold, and you don't hear anyone talking about take all anymore. Because take all used to, in some areas, would take out as much as 10 or 15% of the total wheat yield. It was a pretty rough disease. It's gone. So, I mean, that's an example. Now, one other thing about glyphosate, though, is it does not disappear in the soil. When glyphosate gets in the soil, and I'm not sure of this because I'm stepping into sort of ground here, is glyphosate ties up micronutrients. Certainly, it ties up uh, um, molybdenum. It might tie up molybdenum. It might tie up, things like zinc or manganese, probably. Manganese is the one that at least has been shown to tie up. It might tie up these microbes because they're at low levels because glyphosate is just a phosphate, eh? It's a phosphate salt. And the phosphate salt might tie these up, right? So when you put Roundup on, right? Roundup is in the soil, it's still active in the soil and the roots, and it likely ties up microbes. So you may have problems of you for years because I found out that spud growers in Saskatchewan and the irrigation there were getting glyphosate symptoms on the potatoes. Well, as the glyphosate was in the soil because they would put 100 pounds of phosphate on, and the phosphate now would re-release or knock off the glyphosate. The glyphosate would get taken up by the potatoes. I won a legal case on that, by the way, a long drawn out legal case, because it was not the fault of the applicator. It was not the fault of the farmer. It was the fault of the fact that you reactivated. And it does happen. It's not perfect, you know what I mean? But I use it a lot.
Phosphate reactivated the glyphosate.
Yes, it reactivated. It was still sitting in the soil. You
Mm.
see, and I got papers from Denmark that proves that, as well, because we tend not to think of it, but not a major thing because we know it does happen sometimes. And other things was well, I did find out, Dennis, if someone comes along and sprays a crop of wheat or peas with glyphosate and it's way too immature, you ruin the seed lot. The
Oh yeah.
seedlings coming off from that will be
So how do you recommend when to spray then on?
well, not use it as a desiccant, for
Don't
God's sake.
use it as a desiccant.
No, because I've seen some disasters in sunflowers, peas, and wheat, where it was used as a desiccant and it was used much too early in the maturity of that crop.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's like a first part, and I'm not trying to knock glyphosate. I couldn't live without it. I mean, when I listen to these, organic people and stuff, I feel empathy for them for being kind of on the dumb side. I mean, they really want to make money. Some of them want to make money, and they can. And I'd welcome the fact if they could make money. But if they were honest about it, they wouldn't make money because you can't take from the soil. You see, the reason why the soil levels around in the prairies went down and down and down because we farmed organically for a couple of 100 years. We took it, we took it, we took it, we put nothing back. You see, another thing is, when you get archaeologists and this, they talk about civilizations in Turkey or civilizations in Mexico. A town of, say, 30 or 40,000 arises, and the people live in that town. And then they go, oh, it was drought or thunderstorms or change in climate. No, it wasn't. When they lived in a town of 40,000, they farmed the area around that town, and they denuded that area all around that town for miles, up 10, 15 miles of nutrients, because they lasted 100 years maybe, or 150 years. They kept taking nutrients into the city and not replacing them. They drained the area, because the simple answer is this. When you see primitive people in the Amazon, they use a slash and burn. They look at 5 acres of land, they cut the trees down, burn it, and they grow crops for 2 to 3 years. Then they move. They do the same thing in Borneo. The primitive people take a piece of jungle, hack it down, slash it, burn it, put their crops in. Then they move. In other words, they denude the soil. It's a tropical land, and moves faster, eh? Like when you look at organic stuff in the soil, and an Alberta thing, a 1% organic may give you 10 pounds of nitrogen. Under a Florida condition or a tropical condition, a 1% organic may give you 30 or 40 pounds of nitrogen. It's a much faster breakdown. Figure?
Say that again. 1% organic matter.
In Florida, it would break down much faster. It would give you 30 pounds or maybe even 40. And in a jungle situation, it might give you 40 pounds over the course of the year. So it would break down very rapidly. Whereas in Canada, a 1% organic only gives you 10 pounds, or maybe less than 10 if it was cooler. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, now I'll go on to the next one. If anyone has any questions, you can fire them at
Does
me.
anybody have any questions here for Ieaun? He's on a roll. He is on a roll. But
I'll even take them in Dutch if I have to.
yeah, pick your language. He's
I should have said
multilingual.
Bore da. I speak Welsh, and I was fluent in Welsh. I didn't speak
Are
English
you?
until I was about 10.
Huh.
We didn't speak English in that part of Wales I came from.
You didn't?
No, we didn't even like the English either.
Well, I can imagine.
But anyway, people forget that. Now, I asked you to download this. 16
Yes, yes.
reasons. 16 reasons, right?
16 reasons what?
Why grain growers should never sell crop residues. I mean, you should never sell. I mean, when I see, bales of straw sitting on a field, or they've packed up bales of canola or something, they should never sell those, because, that's the best way to really drain your land of nutrients. You've taken the crop off, and now you're taking an extra load off. Because if you turn to this fact sheet, it's written up in Grain News. If you check it out on Grain News, you'll find it there. Now, I'd like to go through each one separately. Now, I have actually in my mind be able to go up to 20. Now, I'll put my
You've added
glasses
on.
on.
You've added on.
Yes, I've added on a few.
There was 16,
Returning
now there's
cereal
20.
straw to cropland. Returning cereal straw to cropland, preferably using the straw chopper, provides the following 16 benefits. The benefits from using a straw chopper. And I'm not saying I'm responsible, but you guys, you people there are responsible, because somebody out there, or many people out there, are doing it, because I see less and less bales of straw sitting around. Now, if you're a farmer and you've got a cattle operation,
Yeah.
so you want straw, right? Or if you're in an agreement with a neighbor who supplies you with straw, who then returns the manure to you, no problem in that. That's a deal. But when I saw farmers on spec with straw bales, and then I look at their yards, and there's hundreds of straw bales sitting there, and they become mausoleums full of mice. There's mice everywhere and coyotes everywhere.
Jeff is asking, can we get the details on that again? I'm going to maybe try and Google this. 16 reasons. What?
Yeah, it says
Where
60,
is this?
60. Okay, there's the title.
Hold it up there. Hold it up higher. 16 reasons why grain growers should never sell their residue.
Yes, sell a crop residue. 16 reasons. Just put my name, Ieaun Evans, in it. 16 reasons why grain growers should never sell crop residues.
Here it is. Here it is. Grain News, May 25th, 2020. Okay.
Okay,
Read this
now
article and you'll never sell baled straw again. I'll put this link in the chat here. It's 20 now. I mean, this is 5 years ago. You should rewrite it and put the other 4 in there.
well, I should read it out. In other words, cereal straw and other crop residues are very good holders of water in the soil, particularly sandy soil. In other words, your wet straw will hold water.
Mm-hmm.
Soils high in organic matter modify and mute soil residual herbicides. We found that out. In other words, you've seen herbicide residue damage on eroded hilltops, but not on the main part of the field, because the organic fraction will hold or modify the herbicide or tie it up. I'm not quite sure what it does, but you see that.
Yeah.
The crop residual organic matter holds on to fertilizers, particularly leachable nitrogen and sulfur. You see, when you put your nutrients on, they can leach onto the bugs and whatever will leach it onto wheat straw and hold it. And they'll hold sulfur as well, the leachable ones. Crop residues allow for easier crop root penetration when they are likely disked into the soil or during seeding. You see, you open up the soil a bit with bits of straw everywhere. In other words, you aerate the soil a little bit, not too
Hmm.
much.
Yeah.
Crop residues help water penetration into the soil and significantly prevent water runoff and erosion. They allow the water to sort of run down there into the soil. Now, if you leave the straw standing, the stubble standing, the moisture can run down the roots and the stems of those plants, eh? If you work the field like some people keep doing, then you get flooding and rills and runoffs on the field. I see fields around here all the time, slope fields. He's worked the field for some reason in the fall. Why, I don't know. Maybe he had a row with his wife. But he's well, he's worked the field up, and then in the spring you see all these runoff rills on the field, eh? Whereas the person who's across the road, who's left his stubble there, you don't see any runoff. What soil runoff that is. And the other thing too is when we get winds then in late April, early May, I've seen winds, like put clouds and clouds of organic matter in the air and blow them into the trees on the side, the shelter belts.
Mm.
Whereas on the field with the straw on, no clouds. It holds the soil down. In other words, I used to see this in Saskatchewan. You used to fly over Saskatchewan in the 80s and 90s, and you saw these black fields everywhere. In other words, there's snow there, and the field next to it, it blew onto the other field, and the fence lines were always, like 5 foot, 4 or 5 foot of soil on the fence lines. In other words, that was a consequence of straw removal and working its soil up. Now, crop residue was food for increased earthworm activity. People love earthworms. Now, earthworms only came here with the Europeans. You didn't get earthworms when we had a mile of snow, a mile of ice, eh? So earthworms are new, but they're very active, and they till the soil down from the surface down to great depths, down to a foot, 2 foot down. They have to go that deep to survive winters, eh? So they
So the
go way
residue
down.
helps the earthworms?
The earthworms help aerate the soil phenomenally. A square yard of soil may have up to a quarter of a mile of earthworm tunnels. A square yard of soil. They burrow and burrow and burrow in there. They allow the soil for the water to penetrate, eh? Soil with many years of 100% crop residue returns becomes more mellow and reduces tractor draw pull. Now, I remember meeting a Dutch farmer here, a hog farmer, an older guy, back in the 80s, and he was showing me his field. And he was always getting 100 bushels of barley, and he had trouble with some of these new barleys because he didn't realize he put them in too deep, eh? These hulless barleys. So anyway, proudly showed me his land. When he got there, it was clay. What I saw was a mellow soil. And he showed me how mellow it was. He took a spade out, we dug the soil up, and it was really neat looking. Then he took me to the field next door, belonging to a friend who had never put anything on it. And we couldn't even get a shovel in the soil. It was heavy clay. In other words, he had mellowed his soil over 30 or 40 years of hog farming. That's when the manure went back on the land, eh? Right. Less draw pull anyway. Organic matter will blacken light-colored soils and speed up soil warming. When the organic matter gets in the soil, it goes black and it speeds up, especially if you have a lighter soil, a lighter brown or gray soil, it'll speed up the heat absorption. Crop residues combat soil diseases, providing lots of food for harmless saprophytic fungi and bacteria, which in turn kill off plant disease microbes or fight them. In other words, there's a jungle going on in that soil. It's not a simple little thing. It's like a complete fight. And if you have more organic matter in the soil that can be rotted, the rotting fungi attack the other fungi, and they're harmless to the crop plants, eh? So that's another thing. Like crop residues provide a feed source when it breaks down to free-living bacteria, such as rhizobia. That's why rhizobia are in the soil. I mean, a person says, "Oh, I forgot to put inoculant on my soil." That soil could be loaded with rhizobia, even if you didn't put it on. It's not something we have to put on, especially the common rhizobia, because they live in the organic fractions of the soil. They live there. Then they form associations with alfalfa or something. So don't panic, because your soil may have naturally high levels of rhizobia. Think about it.
Nathan Coppert has a question here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you comment on the application of humic/humic acid on soils?
Yes. It's costly and it's a poo-poo, and forget it. It's fine for the greenhouse, but you saw Elston did a wonderful thing the other day, him and Lance Lindblom,
Yeah.
on the thing we have,
Earth, dirt, soil.
thing that Jill does. Um, what it is I said, like putting a jug of humex on an acre of land is like putting a shovel full of snow on top of an igloo. I mean, what you really have to realize is that Lance had put it out. There's 200 pounds of 350 pounds of humex or humex-like, in other words, soil acids in an acre of land with 3% organic. He said a 3% organic land has about 300 pounds of, I forget the name now, humex and the other one, eh? Those are there in the soil. Those are in the organic fraction of the soil. So what they do is they extract that out, sell it by the jug, and charge $50 for the jug, and it's ain't gonna do very much.
Yeah, they were talking about the difference between humic and fulvic and
Humic,
human,
fulvic, yeah.
human, HUMIN,
Yeah.
the different kind of molecules in the soil. I
Well,
can,
they're fine. They're nutrient rich, but they're not going to do much on a field. On a
yeah,
field basis, an acre basis. If you have a greenhouse and you want to grow some crops and you're growing something fancy, or you got a high value crop, it might work. It is a source of nutrient, but it's certainly not an economic way of doing it on a farm basis.
not
I
even
mean,
with the seed. I guess you're not a fan.
I don't think so. I can't see it. In other words, you've got good seed, good vigorous seed from good vigorous plants. And by the way, if you've got rigorous seed grown in a really good crop, there's enough micronutrients in that seed to really take off, eh?
A lot of those seeds are deficient though these days, are they not?
Well, they're lowish, eh? But not that deficient that gets them started. It's from emergence to maturity that really counts, eh? Because to form the seed, they have to have at least that minimum amount of nutrient. Otherwise they wouldn't have formed seed in the first place. You would get like when you get really deficient land, say copper or zinc deficiency, the seeds don't form, or if they do form, they're half size. They should be almost like chaff, eh? So anyway, we'll finish this now. We'll go through this again. Crop residue provide a food source when it breaks down. Right. Crop residues greatly reduce soil compaction, particularly in clay-based soils.
Soil compaction, yeah.
Soil compaction, crop residue, returns
Really?
nutrients, returns.
By how much? What is what by a factor of what, or can you tell me more about that?
Well, like this hog farmer I said, when he started out, his land was clay. He put hog manure on and straw on. He got some cattle as well, and he kept putting back on his land, and he kept working it, and he kept leaving this, his straw residue on the land. He'd work it in, and his land got nice and mellow. In other words, he
Right.
could dig into it. Like, I'll give an example. I moved into Millwoods, Alberta, Edmonton, and my backyard garden was about 100 feet by 100 feet of pure subsoil clay. And he looked at it, and when I planted some plants or trees in there, apples and stuff in there, the water just ran off the clay and ran down to the alleyway below because I was on a bit of a slope. So when I watered it, everything ran on top and ran away. So what I did, I went to 6 different neighbors who had Lawn of the Year awards. In other words, men who take great pride in lawns for some reason. And I asked them on Thursday night because Friday was the collecting day. Could I get the lawn clippings? So I collected lawn clippings every Thursday from about 6 neighborhoods and tipped it on my garden. Do you know, after 5 or 6 years, 6 years, I had to give up doing that because my soil got to be too nutritious. It was full of worms. It was full of worms. They bored down to the soil, and my apple trees were growing much too quickly because they feed a lawn with NP and K, whatever, right? With nutrients, and then they cut the grass, and the grass is loaded with nutrients.
Right.
So I put it on my lawn, on my garden, and the worms came up. I could dig into that garden, and every time I put a shovelful in, there were 10 worms. I use them for fishing, by the way. But the, there were lots of
Cycle of
worms in
life.
there, and the soil went from solid clay to really nutritious clay. And it started to loosen up as well. Everything grew vigorously in there. And it was just a piece of black clay. So when you see people who say, oh, that land is ruined, that soil is ruined. Rubbish. You can rejuvenate that soil by putting back into it. I mean, you're going to have trouble putting back the organic fraction, but it may be down to 1% or something. But you can put back the nutrients in it that you took out, or bring them to levels that you need. You may have trouble with runoffs and stuff, but there's no such thing as ruined land. There's just people who want to. They have ideas, like they lie, they cheat, they lie, they mouth off. They want to cause problems or they want to make money, just like that orange-faced guy south of us.
Wow. Just getting right into
Well,
politics. Is there any other
well,
controversial areas
he always speaks the truth, you know
that
that.
you want to get into?
He's
Sex,
never said a
religion,
lie in
and
his life.
politics here this morning?
He's never said a lie in his life. When I see blatant lies, I get blatant lies. Come on.
Wow.
Anyway,
Yan's in a mood this morning. He's ready to go. He's ready to.
okay. Now, return nutrients to the soil, which are increased over a few years, as calculated earlier each year for wheat straw releases. In other words, a wheat straw in a field after a period of time will release about $72. At least when I wrote this one, about $72 of nutrients because you left it
Probably
on the
about
field.
it's probably about 38 now.
Well, maybe
Well,
double.
nutrients are as much. I guess maybe the crop's not worth as
It's
much.
worth the crop. No, actually, the nutrients
Mhm.
were 72 then. I'd imagine it'd be more now, maybe up to 100.
Mm.
You look at the price of nitrogen.
When was that?
This was when did I do
5
this
years
one?
ago,
5
2020.
years
Yeah, it was
ago. Yeah, okay.
before. Yeah, it'd be more now.
Yeah. I
72.
well, that's the volume of the potash and the phosphate and the nitrogen and the sulfur and little tiny bits of micros too.
Oh, 72.
Yeah, it releases. So you have to get at least that money when you sell the straw. And I've seen farmers sell straw for $10 or $15 a bale.
That's the net amount of the nutrients
Yeah,
at 2020 prices
yeah, and it in other words at
in the
that
straw.
time, so it probably maybe 100 now because you look at the amount of it puts in 60 or 70 pounds of potash there.
And what
1 pound
crop
is
and what
potash.
yield? Sorry,
Hmm?
what crop and what yield was that when you're talking about taking off the
About,
residue?
let's say I'm talking wheat then, right?
Wheat.
Yeah,
And how many bushels of wheat to get that
let's say
number?
60 bushels of wheat. Most
60
wheat will give me
bushels of
about
wheat.
two. They give me 1.5 to 2.5 tons of straw an acre. Just
Hmm.
one measure those things, eh?
So just over a buck a bushel
Yeah.
in 2020 prices.
Yeah, yeah. So in other words, that comes back from the straw itself. And when
Hmm.
when you look at sort of the giveaway, in other words, the, the farmer selling the straw, he should get credit for it. Like in other words,
Well, how much are they getting? Especially since calves are worth more than a load of grain right now.
well, sometimes they can get say $30 a bale or $40 a bale or something.
Mhm.
The cost of baling, the cost of the baler, those are
Yeah,
added in.
yeah,
The cost of
yeah.
transport. Come on. When you look at that, baling straw, the actual cost of nutrient is one factor, but there's almost as much in terms of baling, transport, not as much, but an added factor to it. Why do they
Well,
take it up? Why
how
should they
many
take it?
agronomists out there are wondering what their customers should be charging for this, or they're debating if they should or not? Be curious.
Well, it's supply and demand, because
Mhm.
if you're going to deal with another farmer, that's fine. But if you're hoping for some years when there's a surplus, what do you do with the straw? You stick it around the farmstead and it rots.
Yeah.
I mean, do you imagine? Remember Winnipeg as you turned into Winnipeg from on the highway there? Those
Mhm.
masses and masses of straw bales.
Right.
So
Where they had that
the
big
tons,
fire and it's all went to rent rot. Yeah,
yeah, it
well, that's
all
just
went
a
to
bad
rot.
business plan. But I'm
So okay,
thinking, so I'm thinking about you're talking about the net value of the nutrients, and then you've got all these 20 other reasons. I mean, the price of the nutrients one of them, but you have 19 other reasons in
well,
your head or on
the
paper.
nutrient, yeah, but the nutrient level, as I'll just read it off, it's off the back here. If you had a 60 bushel crop of wheat, you're looking at in that straw 30 pounds of nitrogen. What a pound is nitrogen? You're looking at 9 pounds of phosphate.
Hmm.
You're looking at 65 pounds of potash. Those are rough figures. I couldn't be
Yeah,
exact, but the best I could get when I went to
yeah.
soil labs, eh?
I
And then
have some numbers here that
there's
we
seven
can use.
pounds of sulfur in there. So
Yeah.
that straw is releasing nutrients. So
Mm.
you add the price of those up, eh? Besides the micronutrients it takes off.
Yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
it's sort of that's why I used to always get in trouble with soil scientists because why do they put potash as P2O5? Why do they
You're
I mean
asking me now
I mean
again?
potash is K2O. Why do they put phosphate as P2O5?
That's a chemical.
Why couldn't they call it phosphate or potash on its own instead of putting it, making it complex? You see, when I used to buy fertilizer when I came here, I'd buy ammonium phosphate and I'd go, oh, it's 1620. They would never mention sulfur. Sulfur wasn't even mentioned, and it was a 14 or 15% in there.
Mm.
What the hell? They were going on the Eastern Canada thing where sulfur was airborne, and every field in southern Ontario would get between 20 and 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year from pollution.
Jeff is saying if an acre furrow slice weighs 2 M pounds, 2 M pounds, 2
2
million,
million pounds,
2 million
thereabout,
pounds,
give or
and
take.
is 3% organic matter, then that is 30 tons of organic matter and about 1 to 2 tons of microflora, mostly dormant. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Is it true?
Yeah, yeah.
Boggles the mind.
In other words, that's the reserve in there. And you see, soils on the prairies in the Edmonton area were 9, 10% organic, and now they're down to 4 or 5%.
Oh, yeah.
Down to
When
half.
they were
And
first broken.
yeah, soils in southern Alberta used to be 2, maybe 3, and they're down to 1, 1.5 in some instances. In
Hmm.
other words, they've gone down low. In other words, I mean, if you planted wheat in, say, southern Alberta and there was enough rainfall there, you might get 15 bushels of wheat back from, a bushel an acre of wheat putting in.
Hmm.
But if you fertilize it and the rain is right and you get enough rainfall, you could go 40 bushels or 50 bushels, but you got to put it back. And they put back the nitrogen. They'll even put back the phosphate. They don't sometimes check the potash. And then they go, sulfur. When I first came here, you didn't have to put sulfur on. Why didn't you have to put sulfur on? Because all the bloody fertilizers they sold were sulfur containing ammonium phosphate and ammonium sulfate. They were loaded with sulfur. So nobody needed to put sulfur on cropland because almost all the nitrogen fertilizers they had were sulfur based, sulfate based, ammonium sulfate and ammonium phosphate.
Hmm.
There's lots of sulfur in there. So when by the 70s and 80s when I got here, they were starting to take that sulfur out. They were selling ammonia and urea, no more sulfur. And Alberta does not get sulfur pollution. We get about 1 to 2 pounds a year sulfur pollution per acre, as opposed to Ontario that gets 25 to 50 pounds of sulfur pollution a year, or used to anyway.
Yeah, now I have to put an extra jug of stuff into my truck, and I have a warning on my brand new truck, 2025, that the emissions needs to be serviced. I only got 280 kilometers to go before it's gonna explode or something. And this is the world we live in. Used to get sulfur out of the tailpipe.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Well, it's stank. Anyway, I haven't finished this yet. Uh, crop residue, anyway, crop residue provides a food source. Crop residue greatly reduces soil compaction, particularly in clay soils, returns nutrients to soil which are released over a few years. Now, your fertilizer input will be reduced by an estimated $72 an acre anyway. A straw chopper attachment combine is much cheaper to operate than a straw baler, resulting in improved cropland and financial returns. Compacted clay soils, especially when wet, are most subject to loss of nitrate via denitrification. When they're wet and compacted, bacteria use the nitrate for energy, right? We know that. Now, the other thing I said is, one of the things about when you sell bales of straw is you get these wagons that come on the field, right? Great big crunchy things. They go on the field entrance. They they take on how many tons of straw, right? A
Yeah.
massive field. They squish the soil down all to hell,
Hmm.
and they are very good at spreading clubroot and likely now verticillium because they
Fair.
go from field to field, eh?
Yeah.
Can you imagine them? They are good spreaders of disease. They go into field entrances. Because when I was looking for a clubroot initially, you'd always find it at the field entrance, brought in by either a custom applicator or a somebody who sold straw.
All the things you never think of. Yeah.
Yeah, and you get soil compaction at the field entrance, and
Hmm.
in other words, You get all kinds of things there. You get things like you get worms in the soil and worm casts. You get people who overdo it. Like worm casts are wonderful things they sell. That's nonsense. It's like chicken shit or whatever. It's got nutrients in it, but it's just what they ate, and there's nothing magic about it. It's just common sense. But if you got good land and you've got a lot of you return the straw, you do build up the microflora in there, especially worms, and you've got a better soil, a more porous soil, and it'll drain down deeper and hold water better instead of running
Yeah.
off the field, eh? So when you get a thunderstorm, it's on a slope field instead of running down the hill, it'll often most of it, if not all of it, will go straight down.
Very
So
nice.
anyway, I've got I can sort of entertain questions if you want to, or go back over anything I've talked, or look at what I have here now and see that, you see, why people will buy things. I mean, I've gone to, say, hut right colonies, and they get to know some people as salespeople. And there was one hut right colony, they realized they were short of zinc and copper because they were growing wheat and um, corn, eh? And they were buying it by the jug, and I think something like was it a 5 liter jug or something was worth $50. So I sat down with the and he was going to buy several $1,000s worth. So I sat down with the the field boss, and showed him that each jug contained about uh, 50 cents worth of zinc and $1 worth of copper. In other words, it was a plain foo-foo again. In other words, they were saying, "Oh, look, it's got zinc and copper in it," but the dilution was so bloody high. In other words, read the label, look at the label, look at it. What's it say? What percent? What amount? What I mean, and always figure when you're looking at fields, when you get a soil test back, read the soil test, look at it, and when it says in the soil test 0.4 copper, for example, and you want to grow 60 or 70 bushels of wheat, look at this sheet. That's low. If you want to grow corn, and it says 2% corn, right? That's bloody low. I go back to Ontario when I was there. I did some work on vegetables, rotobakers. They ruined their industry actually with winter canola. But the there would be things like I'd get samples of cabbage and cauliflower sent in. The big growers there of that with molybdenum deficiency, twisted. Oh no, we don't use molybdenum. No, no. But the growers are using molybdenum. Any of the growers on turnips or cabbage or cauliflower, you talk to them and right away they were using molybdenum. You talk to growers there and they go like, "Oh yeah, but we also put a pound of boron on," and they were putting boron and molybdenum on, but that was not recommended by the soil scientists in the province. Guelph is like a citadel, right, of knowledge or supposed. Uh, Much of the information there was not that good. I
Yeah.
could see there was pathologists who were laboring away, and they couldn't see the fact that, see, when you go to university, veterinarians are not taught about micronutrients. They have 1 hour at Guelph, and they have 2 hours at Saskatoon on micronutrients. 2 hours of their whole 5-year curriculum. 2 hours, so they become geniuses, right? A veterinarian doesn't know much about micronutrients. He could be a hell of a good vet, but have to ask an animal nutritionist, not a veterinarian, if you travel with cattle or hogs. It's a nutritionist that does that job. You see, and then the other thing was when I was at university in University of Florida and even Wales, we actually have courses on micronutrient deficiencies. We actually do work on micronutrients. We are horticultural courses. We put little plants on water, on clean water, and see, is this short of zinc or copper or manganese or boron, and look at them. What do soil scientists do? They keep giving names like lover soil and whopper soil and pfiffer soil and Chernozyms, and they do all that. And they know all about the soil, but they don't know anything about the plant. They do all this sort of mechanical, physical stuff. I hope I'm not insulting them. I'm telling them to learn and realize that all of the nutrients, they put that thing up. Remember that thing you see in the soil things? the water spilling out of a pitcher.
Liebig's law of the minimum.
Yeah, the lowest thing. They ignore that. I mean, if your molybdenum is missing, you're in trouble. See, another thing about soil is, and it is a trouble with minimum till, especially up in the Peace region where the soils are 5.1 to 5.5 maybe, is that after say 10 or 12 years, that topsoil may go down to 3 or 4, 3.5 to 4. And then you have trouble with emergence from your canola or wheat because there's no molybdenum in that soil, because when the soil pH goes below 5, your molybdenum becomes unavailable. But I know growers up in the Peace region, what they do, they put $1 worth of molybdenum with the wheat, with every bushel of wheat.
Mm.
It's cheap. And you get people saying, oh, no, you don't need that for stuff. They'll put $50 on a, say, a pesticide, and they'll complain you have to put $1 of molybdenum with wheat. You know what I mean? That's a cheap way. In other words, when I grew up in Wales, our soils were 4.5 to 3.5 to 4.5 acidic, and we put lime in them, but lime was expensive. So what we did, we put molybdenum on the wheat. It was called poor man's lime. In other words, your cereals and seeds would germinate and come up. In other words, you check it out. Nobody's done a thing in the prairies. Phil Thomas and I did some work with University of Idaho, Moscow, Idaho, and they had trouble with canola in some areas. They could not grow it. Phil and I spent about half a day asking them questions, and finally we resolved. We came up and said, the only conclusion we can come to is that you do not have any molybdenum in that soil. Well, 6 months later, we got an answer back and said, you were correct. We checked the soil and could find no detectable molybdenum. And then another year later, we got a thing back. Phil got a thing back saying, we now have a wonderful crop of canola. We put molybdenum in the soil and fixed it. They only had to put a couple of ounces an acre, eh? But and Idaho then did a map showing of the whole state of Idaho. There were areas of high molybdenum that causes problems with copper in cattle. There were areas of average molybdenum, just right, and there were areas about 25% of the state was deficient in molybdenum, and it had trouble with nodulation in alfalfa. It had trouble with things like that. So I've seen areas in Saskatchewan with peas and alfalfa that I'm convinced are molybdenum deficient, but the detection of molybdenum is difficult or to measure. But I wish I could have stayed with those people a little more and said, put some bloody molybdenum on and see if your peas don't turn yellow, if they actually grow normally, because there could well be areas missing that nutrient, that's all. And it's needed in such tiny, tiny amounts. I mean, it almost makes you cry. Now things like zinc is still cheap, copper is expensive. But when you see farmers who get real results, though, from the yield, Ray DeBanco did some stuff and found out you could not grow crops on peatland. You see, here's your peat. Oh, I got it just somewhere. Ray DeBanco did excellent work with peatland, and I'm just going to get a bucket here. And you see, this is peat.
I think you got to hold it up in front of the camera there, bud. There you go.
Hey, there's peat there, right?
Yeah.
And it's common on the prairies. We got masses of peat, right?
Yeah.
And we have land that's got high levels of peat in it, and we have problems with it. Now, Ray DeBanco did some work back in, I think it was 1990, an excellent master's thesis that showed the peatlands in Manitoba. Whenever he found that if he put on copper and loaded it up, he could take barley on peatland from 13 bushels to 80. I've got his. Maybe I should send you copies of his the fact sheet he wrote. That fact sheet was almost hidden in Manitoba. There were people there who didn't believe in micros. I couldn't believe that. But Ray showed that there were thousands and thousands, or tens of thousands of acres that you got huge responses from putting copper on. Massive responses. A fantastic thesis. And when I did some work up in Swan River with some farmers there was a farmer there who kept complaining about getting 50 bushels of sample wheat, and his target yield was 70, and he had 10% organic soil. We finally got him to put on 20 pounds of bluestone, which was expensive, right? Because the copper was $5 a pound or whatever. The bluestone is 25% copper. So it cost him like 30 bucks an acre, put it on, right?
Nathan's asking, can we get a link for that article? Which article are you talking there, Nathan?
Ray DeBenko?
The one from Rita Banco?
No, I have to give you I'll send you a copy
Banco.
with the mail in.
Yeah.
Because it's not it was a fact sheet, but it's not in the fact.
Oh,
I referred to it several times, but it's a fantastic fact sheet,
can
and
you
Ray
send
did
it
a
to
lot of
me and
work
I'll
in
put
it.
it in the group there?
Yeah, and I mean
I
that
think we're
was
going
his
to wrap it
goal.
up there, Ieaun. If anybody else has any questions, that's cool. If not, I think we'll
Well, I
wrap
hope
it
I've
up
answered a
there.
few questions.
Yeah. If anybody has any more questions, speak now or hold your peace till
How
the
come
next
that
session.
Dutchman is quiet? Was he got the?
He's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not. Matt, do you have any questions? Nathan, Robert?
Well, they got an early Christmas, I think on the.
Well, it's coming soon. We're getting together this weekend, and after that, that's kind of all she wrote. No, I think we'll leave it there. Jeff says thanks for the info and the memorable quotes. And yeah, I'm sorry that we don't have any CU credits for you today. It's just a matter of timing. It's we'll try and get it to you later. I'm gonna send Jill a list, and yeah, we'll try and make sure you guys get your CU credits. But thanks so much, Ian. I appreciate the information today. I'll put all this transcripts and recording and everything into the classroom, and then yeah, we'll have another session in the new year. Jill
Yeah,
said thanks.
I can add up. It's good to see fields without bales of straw sitting out there all winter. It's good to see yields that have gone to 57 bushels. I mean, everyone pulls their weight, and most of the younger generation now are getting knowledgeable and doing things. They're treating crop production as crop production, and what you put in is what you put out, rather than some of the older people who believed on beliefs and said, oh, they plant when the moon is in full or moon is not full, or they might do this, or they might run around the field 5 times and then plant it. Uh, they're looking at from a scientific basis and common sense, and it is working, and the yields are going up, and hopefully farmers will make money this year. But it's a hard job and it's a difficult job. But I think when I brought this thing up here, this one, this fact sheet, I mean, this is a copy of it there again. Uh, Minerals for plants, animals, and man. Consult that. That took a lot of time to put together, and that could be your actual working document for any crop that you have. You can adjust the amounts to the yield that you expect, eh? And you're not going to come out exactly, but you're going to come out right within the ballpark. It's not like saying how much N do I put on, how much this. That will tell you how much you need in that soil. But always do a soil test, because when Denise Maurice and I did some soil testing one time, way back when, we found that only 10% of farmers had tested their soil. Now, I think more than 10% of farmers will have checked their bank accounts, but they had not tested their soil. They had no idea what was in there, and they went on hearsay. Put a bit of phosphate on. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So really, it's a science. What you have in your soil, what's in the field. You've done your soil test. Now you figure out what your moisture is going to be, what your yield is going to be for the area, what you think it's going to be, and take a stab at it, and you'll get your 50, 60, or 70 bushels that you target. And if you're lucky, you may get more. But you won't get more if there's no more in the soil. The soil will only give you what it's got, and there's no miracle. And when people talk organic things about growing things organically, it's the exact same nutrients, the exact same chemistry of N, P, and K in organic as in inorganic. There is no difference. And for God's sake, if I tell you one thing to finish now is do not call phosphate, potash, or nitrogen synthetic. There's nothing synthetic about it. These are elements, they are nutrient concentrates. In other words, your phosphate is a nutrient concentrate. Your potash is a nutrient concentrate. They're not synthetic in any way, shape, or form.
Amen. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. Merry Christmas if I don't talk to you, but or see you. But all the best, to everybody. Have a great holidays. Thanks, Ieaun.
Thank you.
Take care.
I can sign off, I guess.